Okay, this is part one of our geometric portrait in the style of Anthony Gerace. So in this part, we're going to just get our picture ready. So here we go. I'm going to be using this picture that I took of model Jordan Hampton Michelson. I took it at an event with a friend of mine who owns a camera store down in Riverside, which is called Image One. I highly recommend checking them out because they often bring in models or do different trainings where you can get some hands-on experience. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is edit this picture and do everything I need to it to make it look the way that I want just in her portrait. So maybe do a little bit of levels, whatever kinds of adjustments you want to do them at this point. It's going to make it so much easier. Then you're going to flatten it down, flatten image, so it's all on one layer. And at this point, if you're going to crop, now is the time to do it. The next step is we're going to cut our subject out of the background, which is so much easier to do if the background is really, really plain. So I'm going to use this tool over here. It's called the Quick Selection tool. And I'm going to just quickly paint over her. And Photoshop is going to predict what I want to select. It does a pretty good job of it. You can be as careful as you would like. I'm just adding in a couple spots that it missed. But because I shot her on a plain white background, it's pretty easy. I just want to make sure nothing got cut off and we're in good shape. So once you have everything selected, you're going to refine the edge. By the way, if let's say it selected something you did not want, you're going to come up here and choose the Subtract from Selection button. So before I was adding to selection, but if I need to take something out, like let's say it selected a chunk of the background, I would subtract from selection, and now my mouse has a minus sign in it, and I would click on things I didn't want to be a part of the selection. But this selection's pretty good, but I'm going to refine it because if I cut her out right now, it's going to be kind of like a chunky cut, and that's not going to look very good. So I would suggest, without getting into too much detail on refine edge, I would smooth a little bit, and I would also feather a little bit. Both of those are going to make your cut around the edge look a lot better. If you're interested, Refine Edge is a great tool and you should learn how to use everything in here, but at this point we're just going to keep it simple and kind of smooth out that edge and then say okay. So it's just going to fix up my edges. And when it's done, I'll have my selection. It looks very similar, but it's going to look better than it did before. And now I want to cut her out and put her on her own layer. So I like the keyboard a lot. You guys know this. So I'm going to do a Control J. So if we look now, layer 1 has that checkered background. If I turn off my background, you can see, indeed, she is cut out. Okay, next step, I'm going to go in and I'm going to add a solid color behind her. But, whoops, I put it on top. So no big deal. Say okay. Drag it down below your layer 1. Pick a color that you like. If you would like to keep within Anthony Gerace's style, it seems like he uses kind of muted colors, but feel free to make this your own. It's your own spin on things. I'm going to pick a color that kind of matches her skin tone and say okay. Now, you can leave it just a plain solid color, but again, if we're inspired by this artist who does these collages, he has like a texture on a lot of his images. If I go back here, we look at some of his stuff, they're not usually just a solid color. They have like some texture to the background. So what I decided to do is I searched in Google texture overlay. And because I'm going to be using this, I went to search tools. So that's not usually showing. So in my images, I went to search tools and I clicked right here and I chose labeled for reuse with modification, or labeled for reuse would be fine too. Basically, it's saying that I have permission to use these images. So I don't want to see everything that's there, not filtered by license. I want to see everything that's labeled for reuse. And so that's already been filtered and I like this texture, kind of looks like crinkly paper or something. So I'm going to view it and right click, copy it, and in Photoshop, Control V for paste. And it is way too small, so I'm going to use my Move tool to make it bigger. I don't need to hold Shift because it's a texture, so I think it's okay if it gets a little stretched, but normally when we stretch things, we want to hold Shift. Looks really pixely until I check it. And I'm going to also change the blending mode. I already looked through all of these and I liked this one, luminosity, and I'm going to reduce the opacity a little bit so it's a little less intense, but it's still there in the background. Okay, at this point, I would save it, and I'm going to go on to part 2 where you're actually going to put the grid on the picture.